Okay, here we are. Hi, Sarah Jane.
Hi, Jen.
It's good to be here with you today. I'm thrilled for this conversation, really important conversation, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. So, and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Meet Your Center interview. Um, Sorry, just doing some little housekeeping here with the Zoom telling us what we're doing. It's wonderful to have all of you here today on this really important subject, and I'm thrilled to have Sarah Jane Shangraw here coming in from Boston. So I'd like to take a moment just to welcome Sarah Jane and read through her bio. Boston-based Sarah Jane Shangraw shares yogic, Buddhist, and psycho-spiritual methods that engender wholeness and connectedness. Through classes, courses, and coaching, she encourages embodied mindfulness without overemphasizing physical sequences. Her teaching is trauma-informed and motivated by the idea that when we feel more at home in ourselves, as we are, in body, heart, and mind, we could more skillfully engage in the world. Academic study in religion and communications, learning and practice in early and tantric Buddhism, and ongoing training in trauma and somatic healing have encouraged Sarah Jane to see human beings as full of potential. She is inspired by many teachers and mentors, including Sarah and Ty Powers of the Insight Yoga Institute, for which she serves as a mentor. And that, of course, is how we met, Sarah Jane.
It is indeed. Are we going to start there? Because I think it's a great way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Of course, you know, I requested this be more of a conversation than an interview. So I am hoping that folks will come to know just as much about you as they do about me. And this seems like the right way to say it, is that you're a practitioner, you're my Dharma sister, and we met on retreat.
We did. We did. It was my first silent retreat.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't know that.
yeah, that was my first silent retreat. And we were staying in the basement um, of the facility, and it was more of a dormitory style situation. So I think there were like 12 other women or so. I don't know if there were men and women. Anyway, there were a lot of people, and it essentially is a retreat center in New York, and so it's cold. And the basement was a cement floor, I
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, yeah.
And so I felt like really intimidated and nervous by the experience. And I remember I brought a stack of books with me because I didn't know at that point that I couldn't read.
Uh-huh.
And I remember at some point you saying to me, you know, there's you're not supposed to read.
Oh no.
No. And I was like, oh, I was so embarrassed. And I brought my books and I locked them in my car. And I was like,
I'm
oh,
not sure I knew that part of the story. Oh my gosh, I'm not
no,
sure I would
no.
have asked you to tell it. But yeah, so for those who don't know, right? So on silent retreats, we avoid reading and even journaling, except for not so much on that retreat where we were invited to do like quick Dharma notes or like Zen poems, just impressionistic quickly. But yeah, to relax the verbal centers of the mind. I'm just sorry that I decided I had to be the police about that.
Oh, no, it wasn't in that spirit. It wasn't in an unfriendly or like, yeah, I think I must have asked you about it because I noticed I was the only one reading. Yeah. And so it wasn't in that spirit at all. I didn't.
No.
Yeah.
No, but I'm not surprised I said something because I really appreciate and crave retreat time and feel as though it's a container for being so different than normal life, sort of like behaving in different ways and investigating ourselves in different circumstances. And so I'm sure that it was like an extension of my sense of protection, how I wanted to create my refuge. Maybe I just wanted to bring you into the refuge a little bit.
And, and you did, I like anchored into kind of seeing you throughout the day, it being my first retreat and familiarizing myself, orienting to the experience. I remember kind of looking out for you because I knew that you were a little more seasoned in that way.
Mm.
And so, and it was not just you, but a couple other people that I knew, of course.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and I too feel that. Like now that I've done a couple retreats and I feel really, there's a sense of reverence, and I want to not only protect myself in that environment, but hold the space for the sangha and
mm.
the practices.
That's really beautiful. And this is not germane to our discussion, but I must name in this moment that I am on a retreat of sorts right now on a 10-day, but it's online. And I learned at the beginning of the pandemic when we started doing these retreats outside of the retreat center and in fact in our homes, that behaving the way we do at the retreat center, where we're so held by everybody, the staff, our teachers, our fellow practitioners, and those supports are not there at home. And in fact, we're trying earnestly to help our family members understand how we want to move through the day and the home and be quiet and all this. It just doesn't work the same way. So
Right.
my solution has been that when I've done a retreat at home during the pandemic times is to say, okay, for these 3 hours, I'm going to behave uh, as if I were on retreat. And I
Mm.
have to name it because there's someone on this call right now who's on that retreat with me, and she's spending more hours a day than I am.
Uh,
And we check in with each other daily. So,
right. I think that's so wise, number one, and compassionate. Because
oh, yeah.
I too have tried to do and hold space here. And I have 4 kids and dogs and cats and husbands. And, like it's never it cannot work unless I banish everyone from the home, which would be impossible. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so we are here today because we have a common interest in a topic that could, that makes most, well, this is an assumption, that could make many people feel very uncomfortable. And that topic is death and dying.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and
I-
I'm really glad that you created this space for it. Thank you so much. And actually, I'm thinking about how what we just set up, that container, talking about our practice and practicing together, is the perfect way to go into this. Because we're essentially describing our relationship and our spiritual path. And there's a phrase for that, which is Kalyanamita, spiritual friends. So
yes,
you and I are spiritual friends. And it's the nourishment that I've received in having spiritual friendships that has allowed me to turn toward this topic in various ways, in practice, but then also in life where I'm starting to serve as a death doula.
absolutely. Yes, and your work with a death doula, you described as very similar to the Sangha relationships we develop, the spiritual friendships that we develop. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a death doula can be many, many things, right? And a death doula is this it's a person, this whole idea of there being death doulas is something that's flourished more recently in new ways. And I'll just mention that the first time I ever heard the phrase death doula, it wasn't that many years ago. I
Mhm.
was already a practitioner and very interested in death contemplations and how they illuminate and bring joy to life, which we can get into. But when I saw the phrase, it was on social media, and I had never seen that before, death doula. And I immediately knew what it was. I mean, on some level, right? I knew what a birth doula was. I knew the concept of a doula. And the second I saw that phrase, I realized, of course, we need doulas kalyanamitas, spiritual friends, companions, when it comes to turning toward this very important stage of life, really the end of life as we near death. So yeah, death doulas look like lots of different things. Some death doulas are educators, consultants. I do a lot of that in terms of the scope of my death doula work. I would love to do more of companioning, which is bringing presence to someone at the end of life. They might be at home in bed, they might be taking visitors at hospice. Death doulas can read, sit in presence. Death doulas can take a walk with, develop legacy projects with someone who's at the end of life. That's a particular area of interest as well for me. Making recordings and doing life reviews. These are essentially gifts for family members too, from the person who is at the end of life. Just some death doulas are really learned in mortuary science and can help people navigate death care and green burials, which is an area that's burgeoning, thankfully, in the States, but it's very complicated. Every state has different rules and policies around different kinds of green burials. So overall, you could describe a death doula as someone who companions at the end of life and is able to help navigate all the different things that are involved in us approaching that point, spiritually, financially, logistically. And they can fill gaps in the healthcare team. They can make sure family members are communicating and that all the members of the healthcare team are communicating as best as possible. Really, it's what you want to make it. And there are some people out there doing amazing things and really building out niches.
Yeah.
That are so needed.
Oh, it's so neat. I mean, so incredibly needed. And as you know, when I found out that you were certified and had gone through formal training for this, I was just immediately curious and also immediately certain that we had somebody like you during a loved one's death, my grandmother's death, that it would have been very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that until you go through that experience personally with a loved one, a precious one, you don't realize the incredible exhaustion
Oh my
that
goodness. Yeah.
that comes in the care and support of
Yeah.
someone that is transitioning.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Right. And I'm sure everyone in this room right now has had various experiences with death, particularly the death of loved ones is really informative. And like you, I wouldn't have known about gaps had I not been through an experience, a very particular experience where, as a healthcare proxy to a friend, partnering with her partner, and spending a lot of time in a hospital while she was in the ICU, and her family members descending, and then seeing the ways in which like really unnecessary things came up, like one family member not wanting other family members to be in the room, and there being a disconnect between what the ICU doctors were saying and doing and managing and suggesting and encouraging, and what the palliative care doctor we had been working with had in mind. So there are just these ways in which there can be miscommunication or gaps, and you don't know until afterward how beneficial it would have been to have someone outside of the situation enough, but with enough compassion and mindfulness and care and powers of observation to be able to notice those gaps and come in and point to resources. I mean, a death doula isn't, the end all be all resource, but all the death doulas I've known and talked to are full of resources with a real interest in providing support in ways that you don't know until they come up.
So what ways do you think people would be surprised, or situations that maybe all of us here listening, things that came up for you that you didn't expect?
So, one thing that came up for me and that I hear from a lot of people is we don't know what to expect, and we spend a lot of time asking questions for which there's no answer, particularly of the healthcare team.
Mm.
So, for example, if you're sitting with someone at the end of life and you see their pallor change, or you see some inflammation, or fluids change, the way their body's retaining fluid or something. A lot of us, when we first see these sorts of changes, will think, what do we do to mitigate that? Like, this is happening, how do we fix it?
Mm.
Or this person isn't taking nourishment any longer, no longer able to eat. How do we fix that? How do we make them eat? So these are all things that are natural and really should be allowed in the course of the death process. But when we don't know that there are things like this that can be allowed and are not harmful to be allowed, they are not harming the person who's dying, it can be really useful to have someone there, I think, who's saying, okay, yeah, I understand that that looks scary, but this is natural. This is part of the process,
Mm.
and so I was missing that, I was missing that for sure. And most of the folks I talk to have anxiety about uncertainty.
Mm.
So that's the biggest place I think it comes up. It's not actually in that case that a doula is filling a gap or giving particular information, but normalizing everything. That
Right.
might be the most important thing, is to come as a steady presence and to normalize how things unfold.
Mm. Right. And it really is about, you know, for me at least, it's just kind of pulling me back into experience and memories, and the energy of the room is really intense, when you're in the experience of witnessing. For me, the suffering that I
Mhm.
had to witness was unbearable.
Oh, yeah, yeah, of course. And there's no one really who's going to come in and fill a role that takes that away, you
Mhm.
know. And but to hold space, were you in a situation where there are other family members? Did you feel held? Did you feel like you were the one who was holding?
Mm.
Curious about that.
Yeah, I did. I felt very supported. I think we were all equally supporting each other, and there were even difficult relationships in the space that um, came together in a supportive way.
Yeah.
So everything was left at the door, which
Mm.
which I think was really really important for. So the prioritization was my grandmother, and I appreciated, and there was such appreciation for uh, setting everything else aside. You know.
Mm. So in the room, along with the suffering, there was a sense of presence and holding and focus and care.
Mhm.
And that's really interesting. I wonder if it was easy to leave some of the difficulty in the interpersonal relationships aside, or on the other side of the door. There's almost like when you're with someone who is actively dying, there is this sense of sacredness,
Mm.
almost like when you're with someone who is giving birth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned this to you when we were talking earlier, and for me, I have 4 children, and I sensed that deeply, um, and I was fortunate. I had never, up until that point, sat bedside, next to somebody so beloved to me.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So it was my first experience with death and dying. But I had a lot of experience with birthing. I kept reflecting on that, like, wow, it just feels like, of course, I don't have the physical like experience of birthing, but it felt the same. That I just felt like deeply connected to this transition that was happening, this
Mhm.
experience. And then I think the other support for me personally is my German Shepherd was with me, my dog.
Oh, really? Oh, that's so great that you got to have the dog in the room.
And he wasn't really in the room most of the time. We were at my grandmother's house, and
Okay.
but he was there. And when I needed breaks, I would leave the room. And animals are so perceptive, and
They are, and I'm remembering you told me a story actually now about your German Shepherd being in the room that I think is a profound story. And I'm wondering if we could give space for that right now, if you're willing to share it.
yeah, it was. My grandmother died on Christmas Eve, which for me was it was very difficult in the moment. As I reflect back on it now, it feels appropriate because she was like an angel on the planet, walking around. She was just very, very kind and um, gentle and childlike. She was just full of magic. And um, anyway, yeah, that morning, the hospice care nurse had come, who, by the way, hospice care nurses in my mind are angels, walking angels on the planet Earth. Like they not only took exceptional care of my grandmother, but exceptional care of us.
Mm.
Making sure that we were eating and drinking and getting breaks and fresh air and sleep and and again, like, a lot of the things that you describe with the death doula role, I experienced in the hospice care nurses. But of course, they're not there enough. Like, I wish
Right.
I
Right.
want to keep them there with me.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah. Yeah.
When they walked out the door, it was like, it was a big deal because we just needed them so much. And what was I saying? Oh, and she was there, and they try to set expectations the best they can, and they were feeling as though we had more time, and or she was feeling that we had some more time, and she left. And for some reason, Boone knew my dog's name is Boone, and he knew he wasn't allowed in the room. Like, they're very intelligent animals. And so for some reason, he saw me sitting there, and I was bedside with my grandmother, and he rushed towards me, almost forgetting what the rule or whatever. And he got within about a foot of me, and he stopped, like, and it was as if, like when an animal sees something, like he like put the brakes on, and all of the hair on his fur stood up, and his ears went back, and he backed out of the space. And I could almost like get like chills telling the story, because in that moment, like, all the hair on the back of my neck stood up, like those moments that you have. And I had this gut feeling that it was time, and that, like, the angel of, I grew up Roman Catholic, like the angel of death was there with us. And yeah, and
Mm.
and within an hour she died.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Animals, different perception than we have. So that was your sense that as you said, the angel of death was there. You felt like that's what the dog was perceiving. Yeah.
You. Yeah, teeth are chattering a little in the moment. So the body knows, right?
Yeah.
And
The
yeah.
body. Yeah. Wow. Thanks for that.
Mm.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting stories about what happens in rooms where folks have the privilege and the benefit to spend time with a loved one who is dying. that isn't always the case. Death can come suddenly.
Mm.
Death can happen, during medical intervention, where the family isn't in the room. It could happen in so many different ways. So as you tell these stories about your grandmother's death, I'm just noticing, I'm feeling really happy for you, actually, that you had that time, and that it was able to unfold and you were there. And
Yeah. A privilege. You said privilege and benefit. And I think that for me, because of the experience I had, it made me feel like having conversations like this are urgent. It's urgent that we
Mhm.
talk about, we have to talk more about death and dying, because we teacher Sarah Powers, and we were just with her, privileged to be with her. And she said during our time together, the condition of death is birth.
Mhm. 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 Yes, all who are born will die. It's the one thing we have in common. It's the only result of birth, the only sure result of birth. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And therefore, can we get more comfortable with it?
Right. Well, that's the sticky part, because so for most people I know, um, outside of our Buddhist community, if I say that, I'm asked not to talk about it, or people walk away, or
Yeah.
that's the normal response, is let's ignore that,
Yeah.
put the blinders on. And yet, and yet, for me personally, and I know we share this, the practices where we contemplate death, where our own death, the death of all of those that we love, for me, that's changed my life in a dramatic way for the better. So can you
Mhm.
elaborate on that for us and just talk about the
Sure.
practices and
Yeah. For me, the motivation to put myself in the way of death and to contemplate it, which I can talk a little bit about in a moment. The motivation really is to undo the conditioning that our society has placed upon me and in me around death. So, just to start by saying that. Since you and I are around the same age, and white women who grew up in the Northeast, I can say that probably culturally we're very, very similar. And we were acculturated to death being sequestered away out of the house, um, and medicalized oftentimes. Right. So now there's a trend toward people dying at home more often, but it's just a reversal of a trend that for decades was in place, which was that people were going to hospitals to die, and death was being managed by medical doctors. And so growing up, you and I probably never saw a wake in a home. We probably went to a funeral home for a wake, and the body was prepared in a certain way. And we saw this over and over. And people didn't speak about death. And yeah, so just to say,
setting the stage, right?
we didn't have the benefit of growing up in a way where in other times and other cultures, people, thank goodness, have the benefit of growing up in a way that includes death with life. um, and just a quick anecdote on that: a friend of mine taught English overseas when we were much younger, in our 20s, and came back and had lots of stories. And one of the stories she had was that she had this apartment, and she was looking out over this street that was bustling, and on the other side of the street, the family who lived in the apartment would every morning pull a mattress out and put the grandmother on the mattress. She was toward the end of life, dying, wasn't mobile, and they would put her outside. And my friend thought, oh my God, what a horrible thing to do, just to drag your grandmother outside and put her there. And we talked about it. And over the years, we've gone back to that story. And what we realized was that they may have been giving the grandmother the chance to be part of the bustle of everyday life. And
Hmm.
it wasn't, in that society, in that culture, an odd thing to do, to include someone who's dying in everyday life. And so giving her the benefit of being among others, and not treating her like, they weren't sending her away to a facility, you know?
Right.
So yeah, so that's the stage, right? I have certain conditioning around death. And then I, really started loving Buddhist practice. And you can't spend too many months learning about mindfulness meditation before you start understanding that one of the key insights of that meditation, yes, it calms us down, which is so lovely. There are so many benefits to it.
Mhm.
But the original point of mindfulness meditation was to give you three key insights into how the world is so that you can be happier with things as they are and not expect them to be different and not feel betrayed by life. And one of those things is impermanence, right? As you know. So impermanence, anicca is the Pali word. And this is the idea that um, nothing is lasting. Everything is changing. Our breath changes moment to moment. And, our thoughts change moment to moment. And, where I live today might not be where I live next year, but I don't know that now. And I'm pretty sure I'll be here. And so I'll be surprised if I'm not. And the people around me and the routines I have, and everything is changing. Seasons are changing, days are changing. We just live in a completely impermanent world. And yet we can feel so betrayed when something changes that we didn't expect or didn't want. As if life had made a promise to us that it wasn't going to change. So I feel in that a lot of hope, that there is this way to get okay with change a little bit better. Not that we won't fully grieve our losses,
Right.
right?
And I think
But
that's important. Like, I think that's
yes,
really
yes.
important to emphasize, because and I even had this question early on, like, if I accept this and work with these practices, will it numb me out? And it's actually just the opposite.
Yeah.
It actually opened me up.
Yeah, I know. I think that people who only hear about these practices without practicing them much I've known some people who have the impression that this is stoicism,
Mhm.
that this is about being okay with change and loss, and that's just how it is. And no, but it's about being able to hold all the feelings that inevitable change will produce within this body, heart, and mind, capacitating ourselves to be able to do that. And not everybody has the benefit in every moment of having the internal resources or the external supports to feel capacitated to meet difficulty. And that's why, all of this is relational. And the idea is that we really need to do this together, you know.
Yes.
I'm glad you just paused there on,
Mhm.
because I too worry about that misunderstanding a lot. And
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for these practices that I don't want them to be misunderstood. Yeah.
Agreed.
But I
Agreed.
feel like we got off your original question for
That's
me.
okay. Motivation. So like, at the end of the day, was there a pivotal moment where you like, this is the motivation, this is the direction I'm going, this is why it's so important for me to do this work?
Yeah. There was not one moment, but the first moment was when I was able to reflect back on the death of my friend. We were both 36 at the time. And I saw that a few things. Number one, the palliative care doctor, who was the most supportive person in the environment in which we were operating, was a
Mhm.
Buddhist. He
Mm.
studied with Joan Halifax, who
Mm.
some people may know of here,
Mm.
who is a Zen priest and activist, and someone who for decades has sat with people who are dying, people in prisons, um, very active at first during the AIDS pandemic. And so there was this feeling of support from someone, and having this idea that the support was coming from somewhere in particular and I could go back to it. There was the transformation that happened for me as I lived through that death and was able to survive it emotionally. And there was the reflecting back and seeing that something was missing.
Mm.
There are a lot of things that went right, and there are a lot of things that went wrong, which will inevitably happen, but some of them may have been supported differently. And when I started getting clarity on that, and then I started working with people one-on-one using yogic and Buddhist practices only at first, I could feel that we were often moving in the direction of dealing with loss, talking about changes and transitions. These are the most important and potentially transformative things in life. So adding in training to be a death doula just seemed like another way to get at work I was already starting to do with folks.
Mhm.
And I trained at the University of Vermont. It was online training.
Yeah.
And so much of our training is these days. That program still runs,
Mm.
very accessible program. I think it's 10 weeks long at the semester, something like that.
Mhm.
And it's associated with a medical school there, the Larner College of Medicine.
Mm.
And they do a great job. There's a big connection to hospice in that community. And so, if you don't already know a lot about hospice, you will come to know a lot about hospice, which, of course, is a wonderful movement that sort of is an extension of the work of Kubler-Ross around change and grief and death and dying. And so, I really appreciated that. There was a lot about scope of practice in that
Mhm.
in that training. So some people come to being a death doula, they're already therapists, or they're already hospice workers,
Mm.
or they're other healthcare workers. Um, all sorts of ways to come into this work. I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher. And
Mhm.
so people will wear different hats, carve out their niche, and take care to do what they can do and not more. So there's a big focus on that in that program. But as long as I'm talking about training, I just wanted to drop in that there's someone I'm really interested in and follow and highly admire
Mm.
that I recommend folks who are interested in this stuff check out.
Mhm.
Just going to make sure that I get her name right. So Alua Arthur is this name of a death doula, and she has a website and a practice called Going with Grace. And she offers a lot of death doula trainings, end of life plannings, and
Mm.
all sorts of things like this. She runs a podcast. She identifies as a Black American woman and also goes into areas and educates around the bias in the death care industry and things like that. So very important work.
Mm.
And if I hadn't done my training at University of Vermont and I knew about her at the time, I'm sure I would have put myself in the way of her. And I plan to continue doing that now. So
Oh, wonderful.
goingwithgrace.com.
Yeah, we'll share that too in the recording and keep the links in our blog. So I appreciate you mentioning her.
Mhm, mhm.
So back to the work of a death doula, I'm imagining that there are ways in which you stay anchored in in specific practices that prepare you to support in that way. Can
Yeah,
you elaborate there?
yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I don't often teach people these practices, but it's part of my practice to do death contemplations, as I know it is part of yours.
Yes.
And for me, these contemplations, there are many that come from the Buddhist tradition. I specifically do death contemplations that come from the Satipatthana Sutta, which is just over 2,000-year-old document that describes the mindfulness practice and training of mindfulness in 4 different domains. And the first domain is the body. And there are lots of different practices and ways to view impermanence in the body, right? Which is the point of the practice. And one of them is to imagine yourself going through the 9 stages of decay as a corpse.
Mm.
So I do not teach that to folks, especially those who come to me for yoga and meditation and stress
Right.
relief. We don't
We're,
have to go there. But you
yeah.
asked about my practice and what
No, I
grounds me
appreciate
to
it.
do this.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'll just mention that that's one. And I think it's, it's provocative. Okay, I'll just say that. And because we mentioned the retreat I'm on with my Dharma sister here, Barbara Ann, right now, I will say that that retreat is about another kind of meditation. And 2 days ago, during the Q&A session, someone asked, should we do these 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing? It's from another sutta, maybe with someone who's dying. And when I heard the question, I thought, yeah, I wasn't sure. And the teacher, Bhikkhu Nalio is his name. He's a German monk and scholar. He said, yeah, no. He was pretty quick to answer no, wasn't he, Barbara Ann? And he said that's not the time. And he said two things that I really loved. Number one, he said it's just a time for presence. I was just like, absolutely. And number two, he said, in order to sit with someone who's dying, you really have to, in an effective way, to really bring presence, you really have to get okay with your own mortality first.
Yeah.
So I see the death contemplations as a way to, it's not like, hey, look at me, I can contemplate 9 stages of decay of my corpse and I'm done. It's a journey, and in a given season, there might be part of that practice that really bothers me. There might be a part of the practice I really love. It changes, everything changes. And I find it overall provocative, but it reinforces a sense of stability and holding capacity for me.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. For me, the death contemplation practices that I've done and do, and they ground me so deeply into my life with a sense of urgency. And so the presence that folds because of that work is I equate to freedom. And I think that it provides a deep motivation when you're experiencing that type of freedom in your life.
Yeah, 100%. That's so beautifully put. And of course, I know that you and I say the same set of vows in the morning. And one of them is about, I won't give the exact wording, but one of them is about how everything is impermanent. So this is part of the 4 thoughts or the 4 mind changings. And the second one is everything is impermanent. And in this vow, we state that we understand that we will die, and knowing this, what is most important.
Yes.
So it's teasing out that urgency. It's like, okay, you don't know. It could happen with the next breath. That's another death contemplation, by the way, is to breathe and contemplate what if you couldn't take your next inhale. So knowing that we could die at any time, we have no control over it. How should we be spending our time?
Yes.
That's the point of it all.
That's the point. That is the point. And I'm thinking of Stephen Levine's book, A Year to Live, as a great resource. I'm thinking about my 23-year-old son has ordered because I talk about this openly with my children, and
it's so great.
My youngest isn't really ready for it, but my 23 and 25-year-old certainly are. And my 17-year-old, I've talked to her as well. But he just ordered a few weeks ago, actually, it was probably back in September, August, around his birthday. There's a poster you can order. And it is and I think it's like 4,000 weeks or something like that. And I'll have to look it up. I should have prepared to talk about this and I didn't. But in the poster, when you put your birth date in, they fill out each week that you've been alive thus far. And then they have the amount of weeks that the average person lives. So they have one for men and one for women. And when you receive the poster, you have a visual display of how much of your life has been lived and what's left. Every week he fills in the squares. And for him, it serves as a great reminder that right now is the time, and it shouldn't surprise anyone at all that this is my son who has over 250 skydiving jumps. I mean, he's really out there living, and I'm proud of that. And I do think that my conversations with him on preciousness and
Mhm.
impermanence have been sticky. You know, he's considering what that means to him. And I think that's all I'm looking for is like, hey, let's talk about this. And this time together is so precious. So let's really be here with each other right
Oh,
now, you know,
yeah.
as we are right now, as
Yeah.
we.
This is precious time. Absolutely. You mentioned year to live. So I want to say that, like your son, I have a mechanism that will drop me reminders throughout the day. Actually, there's an app for that, by the way, and I'm forgetting the name, but let's just set that aside because there's an app for everything. But so I'm doing a year to live, and what that means is people will run the program for a full year, and however they format it, you meet weekly or monthly. My particular group meets monthly, and each month has a theme. And we are meant to be treating this year as our last year. We have the last day of the course is our death date, and we're all counting down. So I've just had my last birthday. This was the
Mhm.
last fall, the last reaping of the harvest. Last spring was my last spring. Let me tell you, when you really put yourself in that mindset and you go for a walk around your neighborhood, it does not look the same as it does every day. So there have been some interesting insights from really trying to live that way. And the mechanism I have, like your son's poster, is I write on my hand. I don't know if you can see that.
I do. 106.
I write on my hand the number of days I have left to live, and that's based on the course end date. And I'm counting them down. There's somebody else in the course who's actually counting them up, which to 365, whatever. You know, we all find our ways, but the idea is that we're all interested in living life to the fullest and really understanding the poignancy of it and not wasting time and remembering what's most important, which I want to go back to that and ask you, what's your answer to that? We say it every morning, knowing
Yeah.
this, knowing that I'm going to die, what's most important? What's
Yeah.
most important?
Love.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Love. Yeah. Do I love, you know, even down to things now, you know, if I'm consuming, and I think that this is something I struggle with, right? I like to buy clothes or whatever. And so I'm trying to rein it in and as a bad habit. And just looking at like this mug, like, do I love, like, does this mug, kind of like does this bring me joy? Right.
Marie Kondo.
But like, do I love this mug? Like, do I love it? You know, does it mean, what does this mean for me right now? So I'm like looking for, like, is the body responding,
Oh,
right?
mhm, mhm,
Do I need to attend this or that, you know, really conscious of that right now, and trying to kind of ground my energy and yeah, just bring this to choices,
mhm, mhm.
right?
Yeah, seeing the beauty in small things, making sure we're better about boundaries. Is that what you were referring to? Because
A
whatever
bit.
you were, I was like resonating. Yeah, big learning for me is to set boundaries, and I bring it up because part of my motivation is that I want to do more of what feels nourishing and connecting and points toward love,
Mhm.
and less of other things. Of course, I have the great privilege to say that. And of course, there are things I must do that I don't love. But
Right. Like cleaning
just
the.
getting at,
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, oh man, like I really don't like cleaning the litter box, and it's something that I have to do. Right. So, yes, it doesn't mean that every single act, you know, every single moment of my life, I'm only doing or connecting in ways that I absolutely love. But there are some necessary moments of life also that.
well, to that litter box, Jen, I mean, that's showing love for your animals, for your fur babies. Like that's taking care. You're
Right.
stewarding them, you know?
Right.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
the person. So
That's a good reminder. That's a good reminder. So there's just we're running out of time. It's
I
wild.
know.
I'm imagining that there's questions. And I also wanted to mention that we mentioned a lot of ways in which we can cultivate these conversations and do this work and incorporate and welcome in practices for these reminders. You are having a conversation on this topic in just a few weeks. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, in 2 weeks. So thank you so much. You're giving me this space, right? And you connected me with this wonderful man. I'm forgetting Ned's last name in this moment, Jen.
Oh, you know what?
You're going to have to fill that in.
Rachel is going to have to drop it in here. So
Okay.
Ned runs Buskirk. Ned Buskirk.
Buskirk.
Yes.
You Are Going to Die is the name of his organization. Talk about provocative, right?
Yes.
So he's just amazing. And you're the one who turned me on to him. Do you want to describe what he does, or would you like me to? I have his mission right here too. You want me
Yeah,
to?
go ahead. You describe
Yeah.
it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So You're Going to Die brings diverse communities creatively into the conversation of death and dying, inspiring life by unabashedly sourcing our shared mortality with concerts, open mics, and workshops for the general population and programming specific to hospice patients in our prison community.
Amazing. He's doing
Don't we
amazing.
all want to speak to this man?
Yeah, he's amazing. And so what was very cool about meeting Ned is I reached out to him and I did not know him. I just reached out and introduced myself and asked him to talk to me or you. And and he's from San Francisco, and he does been doing work there for many, many years. And then I later talked to Rachel Meyer, who is our vice president of business development. Rachel and I have been longtime spiritual sisters as well in the yogic world. And Rachel lived in San Francisco for many, many years, where I met her. Rachel's good friends with Ned and has known him and his wife for many years.
Rachel, I didn't know that.
Yes. So anyway, so it ended up being this really strange web of connectivity and yeah, just that small world moment, which is always really beautiful.
So that's
Um,
wonderful. So he'll be here in 2 weeks, right?
yes, he's coming, and I just want to encourage each of you to join. And also send invitations to your friends and family members, because I do believe we are going to do this more. As a matter of fact, Sarah Jane is leading a special event soon, a death cafe.
Yeah. I would love for everyone who wants to attend a death cafe. Now that's a provocative name for an event,
Yes.
purposely provocative. I did not make it up. Death cafes are a movement, and they started several years ago in the UK. John Underwood was the name of the man who's since passed away, who created this event. It's democratic, it's facilitated to be democratic. Prompts are provided. Pre-COVID, death cafes were in person and everyone ate cake. As a way to come together joyfully and normalize topics. Now, a death cafe is about whatever people bring into the room. So I've been leading death cafes since just before the pandemic. The first one I led, we had folks show up who had had a near-death experience, just received a terminal diagnosis, had lost a child, we're caretaking for a parent who'd just gone into hospice. We're members of the recovery community who had a lot of friends who were at risk of passing away, so on and so forth. So it was such a privilege to facilitate that event and create space where everyone got to share their experiences or take or concerns with each other. And connections were made during the event. So like the elder care lawyer was connected to the woman who was having a hard time with the healthcare proxy and power of attorney issues for her mom. things like that. So death cafes, you never know what's going to unfold because they are purposefully free and democratic. So I encourage everyone to come and to participate, to give and take, to contribute and to receive. So
Absolutely.
couldn't
Well,
be
I'll be
on.
there. I'm signing up and I can't wait. I've never done a death cafe, but I've known about them for some time.
Mhm.
So I would like to encourage each of you to consider joining us. Um, while you were speaking, I was just I felt the sense of urgency to say, death always roots me into the preciousness of life. And I'm so grateful for our precious connection and relationship. And Sarah Jane and I don't do superficial conversations. We don't watch comedies. We also take very awkward pictures independently with our families and our we often laugh and reflect on these things. But I'm just so grateful for the precious conversation we've had and this relationship we share, and just knowing that I could reach out to you for support is really meaningful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. Yeah. And I hope that the dearness that I feel toward you and the way that we are engaged in Kalyanamita, spiritual friendship, um, is a model for others or reminds others of connections they have.
Yes,
Are equally as nourishing. Probably lots of them between people in this room, in fact. But
yes.
just to pause and say yes. Thankful for you and for all the Kalyanamitas I have. Barbara Ann is one. Yeah, so many of them on this call. Yeah. And
So,
Mary. Yeah.
so we have 3 minutes. I thought, I know we don't have much time, but I wanted to see if there were any connection or questions, specific questions. So I'm looking here in the chat and I don't actually see too many, lots of comments, lots of information on that we'll post on the Death Cafe. Yep, a lot of interest in the Death Cafe. So
Cool.
perfect. The awkward picture club. Sarah Kralik said she's also part of our group. So this is a wonderful, wonderful time today. I hope that each of you found our conversation meaningful and inspiring. And I look forward to doing this again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the space and the time.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming today. We appreciate you so much. Have a